Hello, everybody, and thank you for your support of Indie Agency News. And let's meet an indie agency. Aloha.
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 Oh,
What's up?
Goodness, look at us. You're all dressed up.
It's just sort of our way of being. I feel like
Yeah, I was gonna say.
falls asleep and wakes up in a suit.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, sometimes I dress up and people say, you clean up nice.
I bet you do.
That's a good curveball to throw, though.
But the Tukes
I mean,
guys like it.
Yeah, that's a good curveball to throw at people.
I
Keep
know.
them off balance.
Yep.
Keep the hitters off balance.
Yep. Megan and Kevin Weeks joining us. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Secondly, so Kevin, I forgot to mention this to you. I had forgotten that you were in an episode of Everybody Hates Chris with the late great Willie O'Reilly.
Yes.
So I met him in Boston at a hotel.
Yeah.
And so I was standing at the front, and so I'm jet lagged. I'm just sitting there, and all these people start flocking over. I turn to my left and I look over. I go, Mr. O'Reilly. He was just like right there. Couldn't have been nicer.
Yes.
And you've obviously, and we'll touch a little bit on your career a little bit because it has been wildly interesting. Megan's the same though. Megan's had like Meg, you've had like this wild, interesting career. Our paths first crossed, I think it was in 2007. So we've known each other for a very, very long time. But what's exciting about this is that you have decided to put the shingle out with Speekes, a brand new agency. So, some of the questions that we have for prep are somewhat relevant, but you just got started. So give us a little bit of the background, the why and the what, and what you're hoping to accomplish as an agency.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you so much for having us. We're so pumped. We love this community so much. We're about 2 weeks old, so it's a pleasure to introduce ourselves to everybody who's watching and joining today. And so our company is called Speekes, and our overall mission is that we help people, brands, and businesses be their best selves. So Kev and I, it's been so interesting over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Our house has felt like a newsroom. It's been incredible how many phone calls we've gotten from media, from brands, from public personalities as famous as you can imagine, to athletes, to otherwise, just calling us and saying, how do we navigate in this environment today? And I think because of Kev and I mean, clearly we're a diverse couple. We have a really varied background, as you alluded to, Doug. We have very different experiences. Kev's on ESPN every single day. The height of my career was through media and advertising for the last 15, 20 years. And we just recognized that people were feeling a little bit lost in this era. They felt like the media landscape had changed so much. Everyone was getting canceled. The social environment and the social issues of the moment felt like such a steep learning curve. All of the eyes were on the big personalities, and so many of the players, leaders, brands were expected to take a position on major social issues, and very publicly so. And so we recognize, hey, we've kind of been giving our advice away for free, on the side of our main careers for nearly a decade now. And we decided just in the last month or so, like, hey, let's put an offering out there. Obviously, we're not two MBAs. We're not a traditional sort of, consulting firm. I come from a long agency background. Kev's on television every day. And we just said, hey, I think we have something that's unique that we can offer. And hopefully this will be a big part of our legacy is helping these people be their best selves and show up as their best selves and feel that they can act confidently in today's environment.
Right. The thing I will say is, and Kevin, you've seen this firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And athletes in particular have become incredibly sophisticated marketers, or there is a small group that, you got your Kevin Durant's of the world, LeBron James's of the world, some of the legends in your sport, like Wayne Gretzky and Messier. And so they've been able to navigate that as not just as personalities, but as marketing entities. Sidney Crosby, same thing. These are very bankable athletes. But there's also this, and what I find really interesting, and I think with what you're doing very compelling is, yeah, there's a lot out there as it relates to an athlete becoming a marketer. And I'm using that term broadly, not necessarily specifically to brands, but to Meg's point, there is such an environment right now that is hard to navigate. And there's a trust issue that goes in with that. In your experience, both yourself and then observing your athlete colleagues out there, where do you, I just feel like that this is such a human and important opportunity then, because not everybody is a Connor McDavid. There are a lot of athletes that still need to have that level of professionalism, that level of presence, and that level of influence. So what have you observed over the years in how athletes are approaching this, or famous people?
Great question. Thank you for that. I'd say there's no really one size fits all. I think a lot of it is, especially in today's environment, to Meg's point, it's highly nuanced now. A lot of the discussions and a lot of the topics and subject matter are very nuanced. And at times, because they're so nuanced, on the one edge of that can be a little bit inflammatory as well if you can't navigate those things properly. But I would say it's a time of maybe trepidation for a lot of brands, people of influence, C-suite members. There's a lot of trepidation because how do you navigate it? Like, how do you navigate today's landscape? What are you able to say and not say? And to your point as well, a lot of that has been for us, even prior to officially launching and publicly launching Speekes, we've been doing a lot of this advisory for years, really. Like, be it people we've worked with, people we've worked kind of in concert with or for, players that I've known, team owners, senior executives. We've been doing a lot of this. And we just saw overwhelmingly the need, as Meg was saying, after doing it off the side of our desks, essentially, we see the need for it now. And certainly from an athlete perspective, because of the heightened visibility that athletes and brands and organizations and leagues have, no longer are these things exclusive to playing or performing, right? There's kind of, we're at this pretty interesting intersection where a lot of this stuff is cross-pollinated now. And with that, you're expected, as Meg alluded to, you're expected to have a position on X. And not everybody has the fluency, maybe the understanding, and certainly the intimate knowledge of being able to communicate that. So for us, we've been very fortunate that those are skill sets of ours that we have, but also more importantly, we're able to then kind of impart some of the 101s to a lot of the people that we work with and a lot of people that we know.
Absolutely. And I think another trend that we can touch on is that athletes, CEOs, brands, they want to own their own story now. We used to live in a very delineated world where it was sort of like media, advocacy, leadership, and all these things were separate. And you really relied on the media to tell your story. Now with so much owned channel power, and actually more owned channel power than conventional media power in terms of followership around the world, everyone is sort of leaning towards owning their own voice. But with that, to Kev's point, comes a lot of eyeballs. So if you can imagine the trajectory of either a CEO who'd maybe come up the traditional way, through finance, and then they become a CEO, or an athlete who's in a tiny town in Sweden, a farm town in Sweden, and the next year is playing for the New York Rangers and has 10 million followers on social. There's a huge expectation that that person now will become a visionary leader, and we use the word societal authority. They're expected to lead society forward. And brands are no exception. Brands are expected to do the same thing. The way we describe it is this is the human brand era. The people expect brands to have a personality, to have a tone of voice, to have a cause in the world, to have a value proposition, and to fulfill that. And so now, you step into this position of being a societal authority, and the DNA required to fulfill that role is something that we feel really requires harnessing and training. So that's the athlete point of view that, of course, Kev embodies every day. But we can't take for granted that people just have those skill sets. What we're here to do is help to guide them along their way, and then also train them in feeling, confident versus getting themselves in hot water or worse off, being totally silenced and not using their voices at all.
Sure.
No, it's true. And what's interesting here is what we're talking about with Speekes, because what we what we want to be very clear on is that both of you cover a very wide swath, whether it's athlete, whether it's brand, whether it's agency, whether it's marketing. So it's a very interesting space that you're in. And again, you go back to this idea, there are sports agencies, there are marketing agencies that may have a playbook. And generally, again, you're looking at the top half of 1% of athletes that engage with that. But I would say and argue, as someone in the C-suite at a brand, a marketer at a brand, there is such a compelling reason to learn about the other, this huge swath of athlete that they might not necessarily have thought of. And so that's one way of crossing over. Another thing is coaching. Let's look on the agency, the brand, the marketing side. There are a lot of advisory out there, but I think your unique experiences are placed in a way that you'd use the word nuance. And that's the thing about everything that we do all the time, is we look at it as a binary or just one or the other thing. But ultimately the success happens in those those places, in the margins, if you will.
Sure.
And so it occurs to me that where you're going with this is such a value to people, and it's important for them to understand that you need to take the first step, because yeah, you're right. Advice, when you give advice, it's free. That's a little different than, okay, now we want to engage with you in a much more meaningful way. So I mean, I just have to think that what an opportunity for you to really be in these areas that people might not necessarily live in all the time.
For sure. To that point, so if you think about it, you mentioned some agencies, so talent agencies, sports agencies, hockey, you name it, and beyond that, of course, scripted, unscripted. Somebody may really excel in being on camera and being in scripted shows. Somebody may be the most talented director or great in post-production, or somebody might be a great sports agent providing the real details and the nitty-gritty of the contracts, why this contract makes sense for the said player, why it doesn't. But everybody can't be a specialist at everything, right? And we all have our things that we excel at, where we're very competent, where we're very hyper skilled and talented. And for those of us and those of you that are tuning in, I'm sure you can kind of relate to that. Equally, we should know what we don't know. Equally, we should know where we don't excel. And again, if I look at it from a player standpoint, you might not necessarily, from a hockey player, you might not necessarily have the backhand that Sidney Crosby has or Connor McDavid has, but maybe that's something you can work on in the off season. But it isn't only limited to your performing skill set or your primary skill set. So all of that to say, you might not necessarily be the most comfortable in front of the camera. And I remember coming this year with All-Star Weekend, was back home in Toronto because I'm originally from Toronto. So the Toronto Maple Leafs hosted All-Star Weekend. I remember telling you, Connor McDavid seems a lot more at ease. Like, he's really progressed. Like, Connor, you can see he's feeling more confident off camera. He's more confident on camera. When we're talking to him, when we're interviewing him on ESPN, he seems like he's got, and now we're seeing that throughout this whole Stanley Cup playoffs, for example, that he's really made some big strides in that area. And it's not, again, only limited to the player, but it could be the same for the agent. It could be the same for the executive, the CEO.
And their brand partners too. I mean,
exactly. And brand partners, especially because, and I'll kick it to you, Meg, I find having lived a lot of this experience based on our roles along the way, we have a firsthand understanding of what that entails. So let's say from a brand standpoint, sometimes we're at events and they're doing activations, and some of the brands get it right. They understand the little details that, players or people of influence, they understand. Okay. And then you have some other brands that are like, oh, we never thought about that. Oh, we never really accounted for that. We didn't really account for that travel and why that travel was important, or why having a hospitality suite was important, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, to your point, Doug, there's a lot of people who specialize in maybe one area that we're touching. There's a lot of great DEI and social good agencies. There's a lot of great sports agents out there. There's a lot of great reputation and brand building companies. But what we found is that all of those things are now intertwined.
Yep.
So if you think of the worst explosion possible, someone gets drunk and hops on Twitter, they're a huge public personality, and they say something that's really inflammatory, and it just explodes in the middle of the night. What we found, and we have, firsthand experience, is sometimes that athlete would call us the next day and say, what do I do? What do I have to think about now? They wanted Kev's perspective because he sat in the seat of being a public personality to press time. They wanted his perspective because he's so fluent in the media, and they were getting media phone calls. They wanted my perspective because their brand partners were then panicked. They also wanted my perspective because of I have a different side of the media landscape that I understand. And so then we just sort of sorted out that we sit, and we didn't recognize this, Doug, but we sit at a very unique intersection point in between sports, media, advertising, and reputation, and then social good and advocacy, because it lives and breathes in us every day, and it's our household and our DNA.
Right.
And we didn't recognize how unique that was. And so we started to ask some of the people, like, why phone us? Well, I can't phone my agent because he doesn't really understand the media side of the business. I call my PR rep and they don't understand the brand side of the business. I call the brand team and they don't really understand the team athlete piece of it.
I call my parents. They're back home. They don't necessarily understand.
They won't answer.
They still see me as being, their 6-year-old daughter playing volleyball or softball, for example.
Exactly. So it's that all of these things have sort of collapsed now into one entity and one ecosystem and environment where all these things interact together. And you could put a CEO in the middle of that conversation. You could put a brand in the middle of that conversation. And so after phone call 192, we looked at each other and just said, there's a reason why people feel like they can't get an answer to these questions.
Right.
And I think also we obviously represent, I'm a huge advocate for women. I can talk about that all day. Kev's been an incredible advocate for all types of communities, but is a powerful Black advocate who's spoken out so much and used his voice so much for good. And so I also feel that people think that they can call us and they feel that they can trust us, which we feel very fortunate to have that privilege from them.
Well, there's two key things to think about. I always say that to be influential, it takes three things. Number one, you got to show up. Number two, it's building your credibility and building your authority. And both of you have that very much so, very much so. So that's why this is so incredibly interesting. And in a lot of ways, you're helping solve something that people may not understand why they can't get through it, because you just laid it out. Can't call the agent, can't call it's all, you're taking that can't to, no, we can help you. we can absolutely help you with that. And that, no, I think that's so incredible. And Meg, you've worked with, how many huge brands have you worked with? Wow. I mean, the sheer scale of what you worked on earlier in your career, if you want to name check some of the brands you've worked with, it's because I'm like, whoa, okay. But talk a little bit about that experience, because again, we're talking about public personalities, we're talking about athletes, talking about C-suite, but really brands need to really fully understand why this is incredibly important and an important piece of success. And if you can name check if you'd like.
Sure.
Whatever. But rattle off a few of the brands that you've worked with, because Meg, you got skills.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you so much. I feel so lucky. I mean, Kev and I started from so little, both of us. I mean, my first house had no heater, hot water, and Kev lived in a tiny apartment. So it's humbling to even think that we've been able to sit in the rooms that we've been in and for brands to have, trusted me with so many big decisions throughout my career. It feels like a very lucky position to be in. But, from the Disneys to the PepsiCos to, Enterprise, Little Caesars, we've got a gamut of different
Web
brands.
Services.
Yeah, TD Ameritrade.
Yeah.
RBC was one of my first clients as well. So we've between us, sort of covered a huge number of different categories. on the brand side, we're so deeply passionate about the role that brands can play in the future of the world. And it's just been a blast, to work with brands large and small. I would say, Doug, it's really exciting to see what brands are doing now to create a better future for the world. And we really feel that there's no better time than this moment for them to use their voices in terms of advocacy and value. And our whole proposition is that doing good is good business. So I think how brands need to think about this, and it's all about opportunity. We talked about sort of the crisis side of this, but if we talk about when you combine reputational excellence with powerful social good, with a brand that's really delivering value, when those things come together, this maybe sounds like an oversell. I really feel like there is nothing that can stop the business community from changing the world. And I feel like when brands get this right, and you have a leadership team that's trained, you have a culture and a DNA of people who are believing in the product or believing in your offering and believing in the mission and purpose, and that spills out into how you're acting as a brand in the community and the world, and you've then evangelized a whole community of followers and people around that brand and that business, it's incredibly powerful. And I used to say to some of the CEOs that I would work with, like, think of yourselves as running a little mini country.
Yeah.
And think of the impact that you can have if you have 25,000 people around the world, 30,000, 50,000 people around the world. If you can mobilize those people on a mission, I mean, the difference in the lives that you can make to the people inside of your business. And I've had the great fortune, and so has Kev, of having a lot of powerful leaders and great leaders that we've been able to work with, let alone the impact you can have outside of the business. I personally think this is the most exciting time in history to be a CEO, and it's the most powerful time in history to be a brand.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback some great points there about you. I'll piggyback the one point that Meg was making there. Really, the combination of this internally within your team and then externally, it has to be hybridized now.
Yeah,
no longer be just kind of siloed where, oh, we put on this great face and we have great product or great service and we provide that to our customers or our clientele, and that's great, but internally it's a mess, or vice versa. Like it's the brands, to your point, that really get that right have really been able to synergize the two and do so in a way where, starting off internally, you get all of those advocates that work. Those are some of your best, most tangible, most passionate
lifeline.
And when they're echoing that as brand advocates for you, and then they're saying that and they're telling 2 people at the dinner table and 4 people at the barbecue, and then, at their local gym or CrossFit or whatever else it is that they're into in their social circles, then all of a sudden that further amplifies a lot of those great things about your brand. And they're now in the marketplace, and, well, my aunt said that, so I'm going to say that. She's been at brand XYZ for years. And ultimately, that really amplifies your message a lot. And then when you can bring that to, the masses externally, and you get them both right, you hit that, right. You get that synergy, it's magic.
Yeah. Before we go, Kevin, what's going to show up on your IMDb page next? What acting projects? Because you've done, and I think we need to start a petition to Chris Rock of "Get Everybody Hates Chris" back.
Yeah,
so good.
That was
Chris
fun.
Rock show, by the way.
Yeah, that was fun. Everybody Hates Chris was fun.
You did the soap operas too.
Did the soap operas, did The View. Done some animated games. Yeah, some Disney games for us at Disney for the Big City Greens. We were Emmy nominated, so that was cool. We're an Emmy finalist for that. GMA, yeah, you mentioned.
I could see you and Ryan Gosling doing something together.
I would rock with Ryan Gosling.
That's kind of a buddy comedy thing.
Yeah, I would rock with him.
Because I know obviously Ryan Reynolds is Vancouver, but he's Toronto, right?
I think I know Gosling is Canadian. I'm not sure if he's T or not, but
okay.
Yeah, he's Canadian.
A little buddy comedy.
So, yeah, I would do that. He's a star. He's a stud. He does great work.
So talented.
He's super talented.
We have a closet idea, Doug, because as powerful as Kev is and how fearless he is, he'll step out in front of 50 million people and not even bat an eye. He's absolutely terrified of animals.
Oh God. Start sweating just thinking about it right
like
now.
Squirrels, deer, anything.
What about dogs?
Dogs? Are you?
Yeah, scared.
Of course.
Put it in the scared column.
Yeah, put them in the scared column for sure with a capital S.
My golden retriever. She's
okay. Well,
they're the least scary kind of.
Yeah, they're nice. They're supposedly sweet. Everybody says, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
But hey,
so
listen, here's
no animals in the Ryan Gosling vehicle that you got.
Well, that might be the irony.
We want to put him and Kevin Hart on safari. We have a bunch of friends who keep saying we need to get you in all of these crazy nature situations and put a camera in the room because it's.
Well, he's Toronto. Like if he was in Vancouver, if he grew up in Vancouver, he'd be like eating bark and all that.
Bro, this is the whole point. This is the thing. So this is the whole thing. That's part of the irony of the whole thing. So
I know.
Even for Meg, even where she grew up, because she's from Calgary, she's from Alberta. So same thing. Like sometimes on the family chat, they're like, we saw this on the camera. There was a fox in the backyard. We saw a bobcat in the backyard. I'm like, I don't know what part of that's funny. Like, you guys for real?
My goodness.
Not me.
Yeah. Okay.
No way.
All right. All right. I love it. Listen, I am so stoked that you both are doing this. And Meg, you and I have known each other for a very long time. I'm really excited about this. And seriously, just reach out and get to know both of them because I think this is just so incredibly interesting and you're occupying a really important space. So best wishes, continued success, and thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much.
You're the best.
Thank you.
Equally to you. Go indie agencies.
Yes.
We're so excited.
Thank you.